Hello Internet, hello Final Fantasy Brave Exvius loreheads, I'm Jackie Fox, and this is going to be a pretty deep discussion that is going to assume that you have at least a little bit of prerequisite knowledge. First video that I would like to put up as a prerequisite for this is my video on Final Fantasy and philosophy, and this is Shinto and alien influences in Final Fantasy VII. This will explain to us a lot of the historical parallels that I will be referencing here, but also the concept of alien and alien origin within standard JRPG tropes as well will be referenced. But this and also a lot of the philosophy can be best found here, while a lot of the history can be found even more deeply in the video Why Do We Kill Gods in JRPGs by Moon Channel. So both of those things will be in the description. Highly recommend both of those things before you watch this, even though that's roughly about 2 hours of content, just to be able to understand what FFB is doing with its larger themes. And, like, to be honest, this is kind of a little bit of a copy pasta trope of Japanese story design. And once you learn to identify it here, you will begin seeing it in a lot of other games. It is being done differently here. It's not just copy pasta, but it is a pretty well-established trope that somehow still remains fairly elusive to Western audiences, despite it being pretty ever-present in some of the media that we consume, and despite it having leaked out into our media as well. But you could see the entirety of what is happening throughout the War of the Visions as being a metaphor for recent Japanese history over the last 100 years or so, but also in the current moment, being very parallel to current day Japan in a lot of ways. So now that we have that prerequisite out of the way, I assume that you understand that. Let's talk about what we have here. So the chronologically, going back as far as we can into the land of Ardra, we see a land that is separated from the rest of the world by what is thought to be an impassable barrier that very few travelers are brave enough to find their way through, and potentially may need some help from the crystals to even be able to find this place, as that may have been the element that allowed Sodali and Exia to find themselves across the sea in a tiny little rowboat all the way to the remote land of Ardra. This reflects Japan's geological position, first coming in contact with various pre-Chinese dynasties, but eventually coming in contact through China with European traders as well. And those European traders brought with them guns, missionaries, and guns. So these two things went hand in hand for Japan for a while. So we see the foreign missionaries, both in the villain Sodali and his congregation of growing influence, but you also see in the other villains that work so closely with Sodali and are kind of his puppets behind the scenes, the Arms Dealers Guild, who are the ones that are distributing guns to the populations of these countries and thus escalating the state of war. Now, here's the thing. Oh man. No, actually, this is pretty rich. So, in combination, Sodali, the Crystal Sanctum, and the Arms Dealers Guild represent the early groups of European missionaries and traders that would come into Japan to sell their weapons and spread their religion. Editor Jackie here. I thought I had ferreted out all of the connections, but in just re-listening to the very beginning of this, I have already missed at least two really important things to tie these theories together. One of those is that while I talked about European missionaries and traders, I didn't really talk so much about the people who were coming in from the Far East, which is where we get all of the game's samurai. The samurai have a code of personal improvement where they become more powerful. This could be seen as a sort of alternate path to godhood, a path in which an individual can achieve a godlike state or a godlike power through self-discipline. But if you stray in that self-discipline, as we see in one of their side stories, you can become a monster. Very much, and this parallels in a lot of ways the armors that we see, in that the armors can give you so much power as to turn you into a monster, and that seems to be like the only way to achieve more power from the armors. They give you power, and then they turn you into something monstrous. Whereas the way of the samurai can do this, but that is not the goal, and it gives you a means through which to strive from that, which is also amazingly just a really good conceptual part of Knight of Ruinstern being a samurai as a sub-job, in that while he is ostensibly controlled by the greed armor in that particular state, and in the path of darkness, and on a trajectory to becoming an absolute monster himself, even though you could argue that he became a monster metaphorically when he murdered his father while under control of the armor, he also has samurai. He has the teachings that O gave him. He has the teachings of the Far East that helped to temper and mediate his exposure to the representative Western technologization of the greed armor. And I think that, the idea of greed armor, and we're talking about the foreign influence of advanced capitalism into Japan, I mean, that's even a little bit on the nose, but having that Eastern influence in addition to his, kind of Ardran origins was enough to give him an alternative to a path directly into darkness, which would be seen by following the alien Western philosophy of capitalism. So he was able to draw himself out of the greed of capitalism specifically in order to become the redeemed angelic winged Sterne. And he did this through the way of the samurai, which is a representative of the Chinese contribution to Japanese culture over time. But secondly, I also missed an important part of Shinto and kind of mislabeled something. So there's kind of like a storm that is circling around Ardra, and I can't believe I didn't get this in the first take, but this is an obvious reference to the concept of kamikaze within Shinto. Now, I know it's the 21st century, so everyone's thinking, what do you mean? There aren't airplanes. They can't be like dropping airplanes on stuff. But the idea of kamikaze or divine wind within Shinto is actually a much older reference than what you're thinking of, which is a reference to World War II and state Shinto specifically. But before that point, before it was weaponized by state Shinto in that way, the kamikaze was this representation of a divine force that protected Japan in this maelstrom that came through and disrupted ships of Mongolian invaders that were attempting to have their way with Japan. So they saw themselves as like divinely blessed as a nation, even though they didn't, through Shinto, necessarily have an objective, singular god, in a way that's kind of similar to the syncretic beliefs in like pre-modern India, or even kind of in modern India to a great degree still. So that divine wind is circling around Ardra, and it is this factor that keeps them safe from external influences. Now, this would mean that either the Far East has a way of mitigating that, similarly to Sodali's crystal, which allowed him to pass through it on faith as a missionary, And perhaps there is a similar way that like belief in the way of the samurai allows them to the faith to pass through it from the Far East. I'm not really sure, but I did think that those two things were important to mention within the context of this video. But then you also have the ones that are seen as gods, even though they are ostensibly false gods. They are gods in a more Gnostic sense. They have attained knowledge and technology that has allowed them to transcend life, allowed them to transcend. This is very much the story both of Omnilus and Gilgamesh, who are from an alien world in a parallel dimension that is like chronologically forward in time. But not only that, they are more technologically advanced even than that would suggest. And they have gotten to the point where they can give their warriors bracers that make them functionally immortal. This is how Gilgamesh and Omnilus have lived out the last thousands of years. They have special bracelets. That's why Sadali is an immortal god, because they gave him a bracelet. It's not that these people, like, the bar for godhood in Ardra is having a cool bracelet. It's a very, very cool bracelet, but these aren't gods in a fundamental sense. And surprisingly, these won't likely be the gods that we will kill or rise up against, although they aren't necessarily moral or righteous gods. They are outsiders. They have outside motives. They brought with them an outside scourge that had, like, just conceptually centuries in advance of this world in so many ways. Something that they are utterly unprepared for, and something that threatens not only to destroy their entire continent, their whole, every one of their countries, the world that surrounds them, even through the barrier of miasma or whatever that circles around Ardra, and also threatens potentially to break free from this realm and jettison itself into other dimensional spaces and destroy them as well. This is truly a multiverse level threat in the Realmscourge, and it is revealed that this is just a version of weapon, a large killing machine that Emperor Vlad had created in said parallel world to wipe out everyone so that he could reign as the eternal immortal emperor, all by himself. An occupied throne amid an empty kingdom. So naturally, this Realmscourge truly does have the power to obliterate an entire world and just keep going. And arguably it has gotten even stronger now that it has fused with the sensibilities and gods of this world through Omnilus, or kind of a previous false god to it. This could represent state Shinto, and in a way, Gilgamesh and Omnilus could represent state Shinto in general, being that they are... Yeah, no, actually, no, I vibe with this. You know what? No, this completely explains it. Like, it's not just that they are detached from time. You know, that's a good, comfortable in-world justification for why they are the way they are, as I identified in my look at the intermission. But additionally, they are detached because they are these bureaucratic... you know, this really gets to the utilitarianism. Holy crap. Yes, this is state Shinto. This is building up everything into a war machine because that is the only possible answer that could fix things. And this is the world that our heroes are born into. Now, who are our heroes? And a lot of these children have certain conflicts with their parents' embattled positions. And we also see that a lot of their parents have been, despite what we might think and what side we think they are on, they have already been corrupted by either religion or by the Arms Dealers Guild. They have either been corrupted by the missionaries or by the traders. Even Rob had at one point worked with them. This is where we get the glinting armor. So he just never used it in the way that people like Curie or Rogza did. And for each of them, for one, I mean, in using the armor, in using the gifts of the church, the gifts of the outsiders, in literally cloaking themselves in those gifts, they would lose their objective reason. They would eventually become literal monsters. And through Sterne, who is definitely, I think at this point in the story, the protagonist, he is meant to be the primary protagonist. And I think that this whole explanation really justifies that. Because unlike the other children who have been somewhat pure up to this point, Prince Mont, especially being very ideologically pure, his ideology has evolved as he has become king of a nation. However, he's still not super far. Well, he still has hints of the run before this one from the second intermission of the ultimate pacifist Mont. Glaciella wants to see the royalty of Wizet abolished and something to replace it. So she wants progress. She may not exactly know what kind of progress she wants, but she wants the people to make that decision because she recognizes that if she made it for them, she would just be another ruler making a decision on behalf of the people instead of allowing the people to make a decision for themselves. And that could take any number of outcomes, but it is ultimately an allusion to the young minority within Japanese politics. The progressives who want to see a better world for themselves, as opposed to the dominant conservatives who, you know, being older citizens of a country that never lived up to its capitalistic promises to them, they are seeking to get whatever scraps of what they were promised through politics when they can, and because they outnumber and dominate the youth vote, it can seem as though they are cruelly killing the young, much like Curry. I get big Curry just pumping people full of arrows vibes because, you know, he's kind of old, white-haired at the very least. Looks like fucking Julius Caesar with a bow or something, which kind of adds to his alienness. Like, he seems more Roman than Russian, even though the kind of Russian allegory seems to run thick within Wizet. So he's alien even in his own, territory. He seems just cruel and concerned only with benefiting himself and his legacy. He does have some care for Glaciella. He did express finally that he was proud of her as she took power from his hands by executing him. But that simply goes to show that the thing that concerned Curry beyond himself was merely his legacy. So you have this older class of kings, and we have a number of them, actually. So there's Rogza, who has 3 daughters. And then you have Curry, who has Glashella and Rosaluna. Then you have Elda, who has Sterne and Mont. You have Rob, who has Mashari and Dario. Rundle and Heinler are newer, younger kingdoms. Fennes has Moraga. And I think the former queen was Melnia, if I'm not mistaken. Melnia is still around, but Moraga is definitely dead. And of those kings, Rogza, Moraga, Curry, they have all been warped and disgraced and turned into monsters and ultimately needed to be vanquished by the people in many cases, or by our heroes. But also even the older kings that did not, that were not turned into monsters, that did not take up the gifts that were given to them by our foreign adversaries. Even those kings who did in some way accept them into their lands and accept them into their society and deal with them, those kings would also die. And over the course of 2 seasons, we have seen the initial king or queen. Nope, no queens, sadly. Yet. We have queens now. Or we have a queen now. Maybe. We may have multiple queens in one kingdom, or something like that, actually. Anyways, we went from having no queens to having too many queens, arguably, for at least one nation. But even the 2 younger kings, one has been corrupted both. Well, so thinking about Sumi, the idea of sin or corruption being passed through the Arms Dealers Guild. You know, we've talked about the ways that Horn and Leonis both interacted with. Well, okay, so Horn's moment of corruption, the moment at which the Sumi was passed on to Rob, would have been when he worked with Sodley, when he acquired the glinting armor, whatever deal was made as a part of that, which I think might have been marrying off Mashari into Fennes. And I think a lot of the like inciting incidents that put Horn up against Leonis initially, or Fennes or something, it's been a while since I watched the very beginning of the story. All of those were pretty much set into motion by Sodley acting through Horn. That was the moment where Rob was corrupted, and for that he must die. Because only through his death, the death of the old way, the old vanguard within our politics, can the new blood be allowed to finally take over. This is actually a process that is, it's largely happening within FFB as well, although I don't want to get into the lore of that quite as much. But and maybe, and not nearly as dramatically as this. Like, this story plays out this dynamic to a pretty extreme degree, especially at this point. Because even of the young kings who, okay, so Leonis was corrupt. Leonis and Elda was corrupted by the interaction with Gilgamesh when he accepted the prophecy and agreed to end the lives of one of his sons before the age of 18. And ultimately, he would have to pay for this very sin through his son's resentment, which would ultimately lead him into madness, which would lead him to acquire his own Sume, and his own sin through the greed armor. And these two things would ultimately lead to a climactic moment in Season 1 where he murdered his own father. This action would cleanse his father, potentially, of the sume incurred by plotting to kill him, essentially, with an alien god. But it would also deepen the sin of Sterne himself, which again brings me back to him being the ultimate protagonist of the story, at least so far, because after facing that sin, he found redemption, and he found greater power because of it, because of his trial, and because he understood that sume, since, you know, he is now able to fight it even more effectively than ever before, making him potentially the greatest ally in the war against it. But you could also say that he is working alongside Gilgamesh now, who, while he did help him in that process of, let's say, purifying him of his own sin, you could see, I don't know, he has a more neutral interaction with Gilgamesh than his father did. His father agreed to kill off one of his sons. Although, I guess he's going after the Mournblade with Gilgamesh, so that's probably another bad decision there. But I think that ultimately it will be Sterne's decision whether or not to use the Mournblade, and thus, you know, kind of like a Frodo-esque moment of, this is power. You uniquely have the ability to resist it and to make the right decision. So this must be put in your hands to decide whether or not it will be used. And I think ultimately he'll make the decision not to use it, to rely on his own inner power and the strength of his bonds with other allies such as Mont or Glaciella or I don't know how quickly she wants to hop into battle after having babies, but maybe Mashari, you know, like Rosaluna. Everybody get in here. All hands on deck. So you could see this as a cleansing of old blood, of toxic leadership that even at its best was corrupted by contact with sin. You also have Rundle and Heindler. These are the two factions that were from the beginning led by younger men. However, while they do share the same generation as all of the other protagonists, they have now both become antagonists. Oberon was a bit more neutral. He was definitely a simp for a anti-villain in Jayden Rundle, who was okay at times, but overall probably bad and problematic, and really his source Sumi is his interaction with Gilgamesh that acquired him his first ring, but also his interaction with the Arms Dealers Guild that got him the guns that his nation would uniquely take advantage of to start an outward conquest of the rest of Ardra. This is, to my knowledge, a familiar story of what happened with the Shogunate when Japan was first introduced to guns via Eastern traders, in that the Shogunate attempted to buy up as many guns as possible, which is something that, despite a lot of objections to the cultural invasion that was happening, a lot of the objections specifically to the Christian missionaries, the reason that the Shogunate kept allowing missionaries into their country despite these objections and cultural imbalance with them was because they just wanted more and more and more guns. Therefore, they were allowing an evil, an alien subversion of their culture to fester within their country purely because they wanted guns, because they wanted more power, because they wanted to take over their neighboring warlords and consolidate their power and control of Japan. So I feel like this story is really similar to Jayden Rundle's quest to unify Ardra by shooting everyone who resists. And then you've got Heindler, who's kind of been the just following orders Jayden simp, until finally he started to question Jayden, but also after being gaslit as fuck by his ex-girlfriend, fiance? I don't remember which one he was engaged to. There's triplets here. It's confusing. After being gaslit by someone that he used to know and obtaining from her ring of visions, Oberon saw Jayden a bit differently. Stabbed him with his lance, left him to die, and while he doesn't seem to have died yet, he is certainly in pretty bad condition. And I don't know if this is like his penance for the way in which he seeked to unify the world, which isn't necessarily a negative goal, but like the unification through destruction is not a wholesome path towards that. And I think maybe that's a thing that he needed to learn. And even if he hasn't learned it yet, it could be a lesson that he could learn through the witnessing the rampage of a now ring-mad Heindler army and Oberon into Ovis, which is almost certainly going to be a brutal and disgusting affair, and like maybe enough so that Jayden just sees it and he's like, wow, yeah, this is the error of my ways, holy shit. Like, Oberon's out here doing some Kefka level shenanigans, and this is, I'm if you'll have me, I want to fight to defend you, Ovis. And then Jayden and Oberon make up, and Oberon slips off his armor. Jayden takes off that jacket. Sorry. Anyways, the reform that many people are seeking here, both the peace through unification and strength, but also the reform or revolution question within Mazet that has potentially reverberating consequences for the other neighboring kingdoms. Like, Fennes, what's happening? I have no clue what is happening with royal succession in Fennes. Everything in that country seems to be fucked. They lost their king. Nope, Rob was out first. Shit, Elda might have been out also before Moraga. Okay, so they didn't lose their king first, but there's been absolutely no clarification of who took over. Pretty much everyone that I thought would have taken over has left. Venera could be, Venera has, oh, so hold up, everybody, hold on. Venera doesn't want to rule a kingdom. Venera Fennes, daughter of Moraga. But she is the next in line to inherit Fennes. Now, everybody's talking about whether or not Daria means that Garvel potentially or Venera could have a claim to the throne of Horn, and whether that is or not is true is an interesting idea, and it is certainly a larger kingdom than Fennes. However, Venera was the princess of Fennes. This child is also like the next in line there as well. So what if all of this talk about Horn is actually a diversion from a later reveal that the leaderless nation of Fennes now has a leader, potentially through some baby kidnapping, which is about right for Fennes, probably. Especially when you consider that Garvel is looking for a new land for his people, and I feel like he would be a lot less contested in trying this shenanigans in Fennes. He doesn't need the biggest kingdom, he just needs a place to put his homeless nation. And Fennes could be that. I'm just saying, like, maybe it would be settling for the leader of the Arms Dealers Guild to work it out this way, but he wants to give his people a place to live, so why wouldn't this possibly be it? I'm just saying, like, Daria Horn may be a Horn, but she is also a Fennes. The Realmscourge is the representation of late-stage capitalism, like, latest possible stage capitalism. Like, the epitome of late-stage capitalism. Could be no later than we will make thing that make world go boom and other worlds go boom. This is like multiversal existential capitalism. Just because we have to have a dramatic escalation of real world threats, right? I mean, in the real world, we have global climate change, which threatens to destroy our planet. In War of the Visions, we have the logical extreme of capitalist war machine excess that has the ability to destroy every world of Final Fantasy-ness that we have ever nostalgiaed for, ever. All of your memories, all of your base are belong to Realmscourge. And because all of the Final Fantasy worlds are said to be connected through the far plane in FFB lore, then what that means is if the Realmscourge is not defeated in Ardra, it could say spread to Gaia from Final Fantasy VII. It could spread to Spira from Final Fantasy X. You know, it could go anywhere at once and destroy anything at once, and that has franchise level issues. Like, woohoo! You could destroy the entire franchise, in theory. So yeah, that's the big metaphorical mess of all of the weird cultural context and lore-related strangeness that is the basic kind of, I think, thematic outline of War of the Visions from a recent historical perspective of Japan. At least from the little that I know. I'm sure that you can add a lot more context there in the description. Also, there in the comments. If you check out the description, there's going to be a link to every star in the constellation that is the Jackie Fox Media Empire. I have podcasts, I have videos, I have books, I have a Discord. We can play games together. We can just hang out and have a good time. Or you could donate to the channel. But always, you can like and describe. You can like and describe. what you think about this video in the comments, because all engagement is good, and also subscribe while you're at it. No matter what platform you happen to be on, those two things generally work pretty well. Well, I'm Jackie Fox, thank you for tuning in to War of the Visions lore, and I'll see you in the next one. But in the meantime, don't stop studying, loreheads.